Okay, so the recording is started, and now in a minute, I'm going to share my screen. But before I do, just a reminder, we'll finish up today the book of Ruth, 2 chapters out of 4, and then we'll jump into at least an introduction to Ecclesiastes and some well-known and important sections. So with that said, I'm going to.
Did you talk to Jeff?
Okay, wait.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, that's not what I wanted to.
Who
Where my
are you?
All right, wait a minute. Don't go away. Maybe, yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Come on. Ugh. And
It's the end over there.
that. Okay, and we'll get rid of that.
Okay.
And we'll make that bigger. And we'll make that smaller. Okay. So you may remember chapters 1 and 2 of Ruth. We read of how Naomi and her husband Elimelech left Bethlehem during a period of famine, how their sons died and Elimelech also died. There were 2 daughter-in-laws, and Ruth decides to go back to Bethlehem. This is after a fair number of years. And her daughters want to go with her. She discourages them. Orpah leaves to go back to her mother's house, but Ruth clings to Naomi, says, wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lie, I will lie. Your people will be mine, and your God will be mine. And so they go back to Bethlehem, and once they're there, they really are impoverished. And Ruth says to Naomi, let me go, and I will glean in the fields, following the reapers, and I will get us some food. And Naomi says, okay. And actually, for the first time, she calls her my daughter. Ruth has tied herself to Naomi, and Naomi has at that point accepted her as her family, who is a dutiful daughter filled with kindness. At any rate, she goes and she gleans in the field, and as it happens, it is the field of Boaz, who is actually a relative. Boaz sees the kind of person she is, and Boaz himself is called a Gibor Chayil, a man of valor, a man of righteousness. They are a natural pair, both kind people. He looks after her, takes care of her, doesn't let the other reapers molest her. And as the season ends, as the harvest season ends, she goes back to Naomi, to her mother-in-law. And now her mother-in-law now says to her, daughter, I must seek a home for you where you will be happy. So up to this point, Ruth has been looking after Naomi, and Naomi now has turned her concern to Ruth. And she says to her, now there is our kinsman Boaz, whose girls you were close to. Let me see if I can get rid of this, actually. One more line that we don't need. Ugh, no. No. Oh, no. Oh, no.
Loser.
Oh, I don't know, today I'm really discombobulated. Okay. Okay. So here we are again. Sorry about that. So she says, and now there's our kinsman whose girls you were close to, the guy in whose field you were, he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight. So she knows that the harvest is over, and now they have to take the stalks of barley and winnow them, a process where the barley is threshed around and waved, and the stalks and the barley grains come to the threshing floor where they can gather them. So, and this is a time of joy because the harvest has come in. It's been a successful harvest. And so this is not only are they doing it, but they're kind of celebrating in the process, celebrating the harvest, eating and drinking while they are working. And so Naomi says to Ruth, bathe, anoint yourself, dress up, put on beautiful clothes, go down to the threshing. Right? Do not disclose yourself to the man until he has finished eating and drinking, right? So just be there, but don't make yourself seen. And when he lies down, note the place where he lies down, go over, uncover his feet, and lie down. He will tell you what to do, right? So her mother-in-law says, make yourself beautiful. We're going to catch this guy. And she says she'll do it. And so she goes down to the threshing floor, just as her mother-in-law had instructed her. Boaz ate and drank, and in a cheerful mood, right? He's been drinking, went to lie beside the grain pile. She went over stealthily. Oops, what am I doing here? I don't know what it is. I'm just not, this is not going well. Forgive me. Maybe this, I don't even know what this is. There we go. Okay. So she goes over to the threshing floor and in the middle of the night and okay. And the man gave a start. Let me just
further away.
I just wanted
Going down.
Okay. So she went to the threshing floor. She did what she was told. He ate and drank. She went over, uncovered his feet, and lay down. So she lies down at his feet. Now, she is, of course, very vulnerable. She's in this place. There are all these men. They're drunk. And he wakes up in the middle of the night. Ah, he says. And he said, there's a woman. And he says, who are you? Right. So he doesn't quite see who she is. And she says, I am your handmaid, Ruth. Spread your robe over your handmaid. You are a redeeming kinsman. Now, I have to say, you recall that what Naomi said was, whatever he tells you to do, do. But she is taking the initiative here. She says, this is what I want you to do. Spread your robe over me, right? And the image there is, the Hebrew is kanaf, which means a wing. And remember that when she first meets Boaz, he says that he's so impressed with her. And she said, why are you helping me this way? And he says, I know all the kindness that you did to your mother-in-law, Naomi, and how you came under the wings of God. That is to say that she had become Jewish. And now she says to Boaz, spread your wing over me, your robe. And he says, be blessed of the Lord, daughter. Your latest deed of loyalty, of kindness is greater than the first, in that you have not turned to younger men, whether rich or poor. So he's older. He's calling her daughter. He is an older generation. And he is amazed that this beautiful young woman now is offering herself to him. And he says, have no fear. I will do in your behalf whatever you ask. For all the elders of the town know what a fine woman you are. But while it is true that I am a redeeming kinsman, there is another redeemer closer than I. So what does it mean to be a redeeming kinsman here? Well, there are actually two things that are coming into play. The first has to do with land. As we're going to see, it seems that when they were in the land of Moab, uh, Avimelech, who was her uh, father-in-law, right? She married one of his sons. He had sold his land. Presumably, he needed the money, and he had sold it. And there is this idea of land should be redeemed. That is to say, because they want to keep the land within the tribe. And you maybe remember from Joshua not very long ago that the land has been allotted to different tribes. And the idea is they should keep that land in perpetuity. The land should belong to the tribe. And now it's been sold off in Moab. So to be a redeemer, and we see this in the Torah itself, the way you redeem, the obligation is for members of the tribe to buy up and redeem land that has been sold out of the tribe. Now, there's another sense of redemption also, and that has to do with Levirate marriage, where a woman has married a man and he dies without any children. His kinsman, and in the Torah it's specific to his brother, but here it seems to be broader, should marry her, have a child, which will be known as the child of the deceased man. And so his line will continue. So we have these two different ideas of redemption, and both of them are coming into play here, as we'll see in a minute. So he says, lie here till morning, and I'll take care of it. She lay at his feet till dawn. She rose before one person could distinguish another, for he thought, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. So she's up very early, before anyone, because this idea, who comes down to a threshing floor, what kind of a woman dressed up comes down to a threshing floor where men have been eating and drinking? Probably a prostitute. She is not such a person, but the idea is that she could be mistaken for such a person. And so Boaz is concerned with her reputation, not the least of which, of course, because he intends to marry her if he can. He says, hold out the shawl you are wearing. And she held it out, and he puts in 6 measures of barley, puts it on her back, and she goes back to town. A lot of barley, right? She comes to her mother-in-law, who says, how is it? And she told her all the man had done for her. And she added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying to me, do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. And that, of course, is striking because he didn't say that. At least the text doesn't say he said it. But she wants Naomi to think that Boaz is concerned about her. And Naomi says, stay here till you learn the matter, how the matter turns out. The man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. And now we're up to chapter 4, the last chapter in the book. For a minute. Come on. All right, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment to ask if any questions now about chapter 3. Anybody notice something, hear something? Sandy, go ahead.
When Ruth uncovered Boaz's feet, is there some symbolism or some?
Yeah, well, it looks, there are commentators who see it as sexual.
Sexual.
Yeah, that she goes down, and she, I mean, he's sleeping, right? He's in a drunken stupor, probably, though it doesn't say that. but she, she's there and therefore available, right? He could easily take her, but that's not the kind of person he is. We've seen that again and again. He's not the kind of person who would take advantage of a woman under those circumstances. Remember that when she first went to his property to glean, his major concern was that she not be molested. She have enough to eat. But it's a kind of suggestive situation.
Mhm.
And one could read it that way, but the text clearly doesn't want us to see it that way. But that's, of course, also why he's concerned that she not be seen there.
Right.
Any other questions before we get on to chapter 4? Barry, and if you could lower your screen so I can see your face.
Yeah.
Just
Uh,
I still see
Yes,
it.
just, an observation
Yeah,
that Boaz has to tell his workers not to molest Ruth,
right.
which suggests to me that if he doesn't say anything, they're kind of free to do that. Or they
Well, I think it speaks of the norms of the day, right? And remember that he has fields, right? It's out of sight, right? And here you have these poor and destitute women, and they are vulnerable. So he wants to protect her. That's what we've seen both economically and physically. So here she has nothing to worry about, but she has put herself in jeopardy.
We know we've of course we mentioned last week, and we've read in the Bible how you're required to allow some gleanings to be left for the poor,
Right,
right?
right.
But that doesn't mean that the poor are free or are safe from molestation
right.
in the
Well, I
process.
mean, the assumption is that people won't do that, but
Right.
they are vulnerable, no question. And remember, it's worth noting also that she was entitled to glean, and poor Ard, but he went way out of his way
Right.
to tell his workers, don't be too careful. Throw some sheaves of nut of barley down where she can get it, and he's really looking out for her. And here he is just enormously flattered that she is willing, in fact, to go with him, to marry him. Okay, so I would also note that remember when Naomi, a lot of this story is this passage from fullness, right? She was full in Bethlehem, and then it was all gone, and she goes off to Moab, and when she comes back, she has nothing, and she's going to go from nothingness to fullness. We're going to see that fullness on two levels, and the first here is this abundance of grain that Ruth comes back, and we'll see the other piece in a bit. Carol, you'll have to unmute, Carol.
Who was his first wife?
We don't know.
Okay.
We don't even know if there was a first,
Ah,
right? We really know nothing about him. He, in theory, he could still have a wife, right? Because they were a polygamous society, but one does not get that sense.
no.
Whether he's an older widower, or and women died in childbirth. I mean, it really the mortality, not just for infants but for mothers, was fairly high. So he could have been married and still had no children, but we just have no sense. Okay, anything else? If not, chapter 4. Let's move back now, and I'm gonna share my screen one more time. Okay, chapter 4. Why do I have that? Come on, go away. Boaz has to take care of this. He went to the gate, he sat down there, and the Redeemer who Boaz had mentioned comes, and he says, come over here, so-and-so. Now, he's called Plony. Plony is, I guess in English, it would be something like John Doe. Now, he has a name, but the text doesn't want to give him a name. And it's deliberately depriving him of a name because, as we're going to see, by refusing to marry Ruth, he's refusing to do the right thing, which is to allow Ruth's husband's name to continue through a child that is born to her. And so he won't allow the deceased's name to continue, and so he loses his name in the narration. Okay, so he calls him over. Boaz takes 10 elders of the town, has them sit there. And this is at the gate, because the gate of the town is where all legal transactions took place. He says to the Redeemer, Naomi, now returned from the country of Moab, must sell the piece of land which belonged to our kinsman Elimelech. Right? Time for that land to come back to the tribe. I thought I should disclose the matter to you and say, acquire it in the presence of those seated here, in the presence of the elders of my people. If you are willing to redeem it, redeem. But if you will not redeem it, tell me that I will know. I may know, for there is no one to redeem but you, and I come after you. Good. So the guy says, sure, I'll buy that land. I'm willing to redeem it. And Boaz said, but when you acquire the property from Naomi and Ruth the Moabite, you must also acquire the wife of the deceased so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon the estate. So yes, you can be the land redeemer and add to your property, but you also have to take Ruth. And he says, I can't redeem it for myself lest I impair my own estate, right? Because this land won't stay with me now. It'll go to the child that is born, which will not be my child. And there's also a sense in the commentaries that he doesn't really want to marry Ruth, the Moabite. He says, you can go ahead and do it. I'm not going to do it. And now we're going to see how that happened. This is what was formally done in Israel in cases of redemption or exchange. So this little note tells us that this is happening this is being narrated a long time after these events, because this way of making a legal deal of transferring property did not even exist at the time that this story is told. So it has to be explained. So how did they do it? One man would take off his sandal and hand it to the other. Such is the practice in Israel. So this idea that there has to be some kind of acquisition, that there has to be a transfer, a physical transfer, we see something like it even in Jewish law. At the time that, for example, a get is given, a Jewish divorce, the husband or his agent has to hand it to the wife or her agent, and it is the passing of a physical object. In this case, it's also a contract, but it can't just be written and witnessed, it has to be handed. And so the Redeemer said to Boaz, acquire for yourself, and he takes off his sandal. And Boaz says to the elders and the rest of the people, you are witnesses that I am acquiring from Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Machlon. I'm also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Machlon, as my wife, so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate, that the name of the deceased may not disappear from his kinsman from the gate of his hometown. You are witnesses. And this looks very much like a legal formula. It's like he's a script that he's reading. And he starts by saying, You are witnesses. And he ends by saying, you are witnesses. And the people answer, we are. And may the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built up the house of Israel. And note that in this sort of blessing, she is being equated with a matriarch.
Mhm.
And he's also told, prosper in Ephrata, perpetuate your name in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah through the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman. And this is going all the way back right to the origins of the tribe of Judah. Boaz marries Ruth. She becomes his wife. He cohabits with her, and she conceives and bears a son. And the women say to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not withheld a redeemer from you today. May his name be perpetuated in Israel. He will renew your life, sustain your old age. He is born of your daughter-in-law who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons. She takes the child, holds it to her bosom. She becomes his foster mother. And foster mother, not literally so, right? I mean, his mother is right there, but there is a sense that there's a deep, deep bond here. And this, remember I said she came back empty and then she became full, and we looked at the grain, and here's the ultimate fullness. This woman who lost her child, lost her husband and lost her children, now through the devotion of her daughter-in-law has a grandson. And the women neighbors gave him a name. A son is born to Naomi. And in this sense, really, we're talking about a grandson. And they named him Oved. And he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Striking that the women do the neighbors are the ones who name him. This is a world of women. We've seen that again and again. He's a part of the community. It's as though the community is naming him. And of course, it is a descendant of that community who will become the king of Israel. And here we have the line, which is going to bring us to David, Perez to Hezron, Hezron to Ram, Ram to Aminadav, Aminadav to Nachshon, Nachshon, Salmon, Salmon, Boaz, Boaz, Oved, Oved, Jesse, Yishai, and Yishai begot David. And that genealogy brings us to the conclusion of the book of Ruth. Questions, comments, thoughts? Okay, so what we've seen is actually this Moabite woman who, according to biblical law, really was to be excluded from the community. A Moabite may not enter the congregation of Israel, says the book of Deuteronomy. Not only does she enter it, she accepts God as her God, she remains a Moabite, at least she's described that way throughout her life. But this outsider, through chesed, through kindness, actually not only is accepted, but becomes the grandmother, I guess great-grandmother, of David. And ultimately, according to rabbinic tradition, the Messiah will come through this. Myra, unmute. Unmute. Still muted. I need you to unmute, Myra. I can't hear a word you're saying.
She's not.
You can unmute her, Rabbi.
Okay, I'm unmuted. It's interesting because I heard or thought that they claim, the Christians, that Jesus is a descendant of David and possibly Ruth. Is that correct?
So the claim in the Christian claim, it's a difficult claim. But because the Jewish tradition maintains that the Messiah is going to come through the line of David, And they want to say that this figure of Jesus is the fulfillment of the Jewish notion of the Messiah, right? So since the Messiah has to be Ben David, right, the descendant of David, they need to make that claim. And they make that claim through Joseph, Jesus's father. And in the New Testament, there's a lineage that brings us there. The problem, of course, is that you can't maintain that idea and maintain the virgin birth.
Oh,
Because if Joseph is not the father, then the idea that he's, if God is the one, right? Then and he's the son of God. He can't both be the son of God and be a descendant of David. And I suspect those are just two different traditions that have come down and coalesced and really are internally contradictory. Any other questions before we turn to Ecclesiastes? All right, having heard none, and I do want to, we have about a half hour, so we will not do justice to it, but we will try. And unfortunately, I may have lost it in I'm going to share my screen. Let me do that. Where is it? And then, no, I seem to have lost it. So I have to get it again. Aria Kohelet. And we have Ecclesiastes. And we're going to do chapter 1. And then this thing.
Hi,
Okay, so gotta bring this.
1 o'clock.
Somehow I have to bring this down.
Somebody on the phone.
All right, see you then.
Uh,
I don't know. All I know, she's coming at 1.
I don't know. Okay, we'll try to do it anyway. So
Uh-huh.
Ecclesiastes is a book.
Around
Whoever isn't muted,
It'll
please
be for-
mute. I
we
can
have
hear you
to,
talking.
It's
um,
10.
oh, whatchamacallit?
We just,
I'll talk to you later. I'm in the middle of a class.
good.
Okay, I'll tell you later. Bye.
Okay. So the words of Kohelet, the son of David in King in Jerusalem. So Kohelet, son of David, of course, is Solomon. He's called here Kohelet. Now, this may just be, as we've seen earlier, it's not clear that this is, that he is the son of David, that this text really reflects Solomon's words, because the superscripts have actually were added later. And Solomon, of course, was known as the wisest of all kings. And so it would be obvious why it would be ascribed to him, because he's not called Solomon here, he's called Kohelet. And Kohelet is the word kahal, Kohelet, has to do with collection. The kahal is a collection of people. Tehillah is a congregation, people coming together. And what exactly he is collecting, maybe he's collecting or assembling wisdom or ideas. This is a part of the Bible, which is known as wisdom literature. And we have other books also, the book of Job, the book of Proverbs. And these books are collections, philosophical in nature, thinking about really human beings, God, our relation to God. And this is part, I really would like to make this go away, but I can't. Okay. So what does Kohelet say? And this is really striking. Hevel Hevelim Hakol Havel. Utter futility, all is futile. So what is, what does he say about life? It is futile. And the Hebrew word hevel really is a word which means breath. You know, it disappears like your breath just goes away. And he says, what value is there for human beings? All the gains he makes under the sun. One generation goes, another generation comes. The earth remains the same. The sun rises, the sun sets and goes back to where it rises. The winds southward blow, northward, ever turning. On its rounds, it returns. All streams flow to the sea is never full. To the place from which they flow, they go back again. This idea, probably in ancient times, that there sort of water tunnels under the earth, goes back to its source. And then all things are wearisome. No one can even state them. No, the eye never has enough of seeing, the ear of hearing. Only that shall happen, only that shall happen which has happened, only that occur which has occurred. There isn't anything new under the sun. Sometimes there is a phenomena which they say, look, it's new, but really it occurred long since in ages that went before us. The earlier ones are not remembered. So too those that will occur later will no longer be remembered then. Those that will occur at the very end. So let me stop the share for a minute. So what do you make of that?
How?
It's all vanity. Nothing changes. No one will be remembered. Pretty upbeat, right?
Right.
It's this is in some ways, the opposite of Ruth. Ruth is positive. Goodness triumphs, and the name of the deceased will be remembered. But here Kohelet is saying, nah, you sense this sense of despair. Does life mean anything? Does accomplishment mean anything? Even when we think we're accomplishing it, are we really accomplishing anything? By the way, I'm struck by this idea there's nothing new under the sun, right? It's not true in our world, right? I mean, the pace of progress is dizzying. Beth and I were talking the other day about the fact that, every time they upgrade the computer system, we are completely lost. How do you figure out how it changed? It's just impossible to keep up, right? But their world was the same. Generation after generation, life was exactly the same. Nothing new under the sun, really. The winds blow, people plant crops, they're born, they die. Even the things they think they accomplish, they don't accomplish. I'm thinking of that poem, who was it who wrote Osmondius? That poem?
Oh,
You
yes.
come across this statue in the wilderness to some great king, and it's wasted, it's destroyed. The greatest king is not remembered. No one knows. So you can see he is really despairing. It's quite negative, and I have to say this book will be that way. It's a very negative view of life. Philosopher who is saying, what does it amount to anyway? Okay, let us go on. So, thank you. All right. So again, now he says, I, Kohelet, was king in Jerusalem over Israel. I set my mind to study, to probe with wisdom all that happens under the sun, an unhappy business, that which God gave men to be concerned with. So he says, and this idea, how does one get wisdom? He's doing it empirically. He's saying, I'll study the world and I'll come to understand why we are here. I observed all the happenings under the sun, and I found it was just hevel, just wind, a twisted thing that cannot be made straight, a lack that cannot be good. And I said to myself, here I have grown richer and wiser than any that ruled before me in Jerusalem. This really does sound like Solomon. My mind has zealously absorbed wisdom and learning. And so I set my mind to appreciate wisdom, to appraise madness and folly. And I learned this too, this search for wisdom, just wind. As wisdom grows, vexation grows. To increase learning is to increase heartache. So I said to myself, come, I'll treat you with merriment, taste mirth. That too was futile. Of revelry, I said, it's mad. Of merriment, I said, what's good of it? What's the good of it? I ventured out to tempt my flesh with wine and grasp folly, while letting my mind direct to wisdom, to the end that I might learn which of the two was better for men to practice in their few days of life under the sun. This idea of a few days, life passes very quickly, right? And then we're gone. One of the things that we'll see in this book, he doesn't think, if there is an afterlife, we can't know it. The idea that we will be rewarded for our good deeds and punished for our bad, unclear in the next world, unclear. I multiplied my possessions. I built myself houses. I planted vineyards. I laid out gardens and groves in which I planted every kind of fruit tree. I constructed pools of water to irrigate, enough to irrigate a forest. I bought slaves, I acquired stewards, I acquired more cattle, herds, and flocks than all who were before me in Jerusalem. I amassed silver and gold and treasures of kings and provinces. I got myself singers, as well as the luxuries of commoners, coffers and coffers of them. I gained more wealth than anyone before me. My wisdom remained with me. I withheld from my eyes nothing they asked for, nothing that is that my eyes saw and wanted. I denied myself no enjoyment. I got enjoyment, and that was all I got. Then my thoughts turned to all the fortune my hands had built up, the wealth I had acquired. And oh, it was futile. The pursuit of wind, there was nothing of value. For what will the man be like who will succeed? One is ruling over all who built long ago. I found that wisdom is superior to folly, light superior to darkness. So it's better to know, right, than to walk in darkness. You may think that the riches of the world will bring you lasting meaning, not so. I realized that the same fate waits both. So I thought, the fate of the fool is also destined for me. To what advantage then have I been wise? And I came to the conclusion it was futile, because wise man, just like the fool is not, the wise man is not remembered forever. Whereas the succeeding days roll by, both are forgotten. The wise man dies just like the fool. And so I loathed life. I was distressed, but all that goes on under the sun. Everything was futile in the pursuit of wind. I loathed the wealth. And let me just jump ahead. I came to view with despair all the gains I've made. For what does a man get for toiling and worrying he does under the sun? All his days, his thoughts are grief and heartache. And every night his mind has no respite. That too is futile. And now he says, there is nothing worthwhile for a man but to eat and drink and afford himself enjoyment by his means. And even that, I noted, comes from God. So he says, great wealth, great riches, nah. So what should we do? And it's basically live and enjoy. Don't try to amass wealth. Live and enjoy. That's what's worthwhile, right? This is very cynical, despairing.
Mm.
We don't worry about what comes next. I wouldn't say it's amoral, because he says it's a gift, right? All what we have, the days that we're given, may not amount to something in the long run, but they are a gift from God. For who eats and who enjoys but myself. So there's a wonderful statement in the Talmud, in the Jerusalem Talmud, that says we will have to account to God ultimately for the pleasures of life that we did not enjoy when we had an opportunity. I wouldn't say it's hedonistic, but it is. We don't know. Things don't last. We're here. We should enjoy it while we can. Let me stop my share for a minute. Thoughts on this? Can you believe this is in the Bible? I have to say, it is not, it is very, very untypical. We talked about the fact that there was some controversy over the Song of Songs. Should it have been included? The rabbis debate why it was included, because it's so erotic. And here we have this very existentialist, somber book. And we'll see, it does talk about God, but, kind of a downer. All right, I'm just going to read a few more passages because we're really out of time. Let's jump here. Let me go back to the screen share. I want to move ahead to chapter 3. Let's do that quickly. Yeah. This is really quite famous thanks to Pete Seeger and the Birds. There is a season for everything, a time for every experience, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time for uprooting the planted, for slaying and healing, for tearing down and building up, for weeping and laughing, wailing and dancing, throwing stones and gathering stones, embracing and shunning embraces, a time for seeking and a time for losing, a time for keeping and discarding, ripping and sewing. By the way, this is probably a reference, ripping and sewing is probably a reference to mourning, right? You tear your clothing, you go into mourning, but then you re-sew what's torn. We don't do that. Many people wear ribbons today, but actually the tradition was you could re-sew it. A time for loving and hating, war and peace. What value then can a man of affairs get from what he earns? I have observed the business that God gave man to be concerned with. He brings everything to pass precisely at his time. He puts eternity in the mind, but without man ever guessing from the first to the last all things that God brings to pass. That is, stuff will happen, you'll dance, and you'll mourn. Good will come, bad will come. And God will cause that to happen, and it's not worth speculating about. So what is worthwhile? Enjoy yourself, do good. A man, that whatever a man does eat and drink and get enjoyment out of his wealth is a gift from God. And everything that happens because of God. I've observed there's justice and wickedness in the world, righteousness and wicked, and God will doom the righteous and the wicked. There's a time for every experience. And so he goes on. I'm going to jump ahead if I can. Chapter 5. Come on. Back to the beginning, just to give you one more.
Aye.
He says, keep your mouth from being rash, not your throat. Be quick to bring forth speech before God. God is in heaven, you are on earth. Your words should be few. Just as dreams come with much brooding, so does foolish utterance come with speech. When you make a vow, don't delay to fulfillment. He has no pleasure in fools. It is better not to vow. Let your mouth bring you, but don't let your mouth bring you into disfavor. So he's really concerned with speech. Don't talk too much. Don't promise too much. Don't, God, you may anger God in the way that you talk. Dreaming leads to futility. Don't dream of riches. Just futile. And let's jump ahead to chapter 11. Oh, for gosh sakes. Tell me I have. This way. Here he says, very famous line, that's why I wanted you to see it. Spread your bread forth upon the waters, for in many days you will find it. Distribute portions to 7 or to 8, for you cannot know what misfortune will. So not only should we try to find happiness in the world, enjoy God's blessing, but take care of the poor, right? And it'll come back to you. Distribute to 7 and to 8 people, right? And this is not just a few. In other words, you cannot know what misfortune will come. Don't worry. Just do what you need to do. If you're a farmer, don't watch the wind. Don't say, oh well, things don't look good, I won't plant, because you'll never plant. You just have to plant in the fall, you reap. That's how you need to do it. And in the end, though, we get to the very end of the book. And then he says, the sum of everything, when all is said and done, revere God, observe his commandments. This applies to everyone. Now, I have to say that last line seems completely inconsistent with the rest of the book, which doesn't say anything about observing God's commandments. And there are those who think this was really added later, just to clean things up, to change the note, to make this a more acceptable religious text. It is, I think, a profound meditation on life, and worth reading. So we really only had time to do a little bit of it, a taste of it.
Mm.
But please read it. I'll spend, if you do, after you read it, if you have some questions or thoughts, I would happily take them up next time. And then we will finish up with the book of Jonah. Barry, go ahead.
As far as the tone is concerned, I see similarities with Buddhism, with the
Yes. Yes, I think-
sense of futility.
Yes. Well, Buddhism goes further, right? It sort of talks about life as pain.
Yeah, so there's more
So-
emphasis of the
Right. I don't think,
how to explain the suffering in the world. And
right. Kohelet doesn't really see the world as a place of suffering, but rather a world that has suffering in it as well as joy, but it all passes. Nothing is permanent, right? Don't think you're going to make a mark in this world that will last. It doesn't last. Now, here's the irony. This book was written thousands of years ago. It lasted. I mean, he made his mark, right? People will be reading this in another 500 years. I mean, in a certain sense, right? The whole thing is believed. B, go ahead.
Why should we study? Why should we go on if everything is worthless? That whatever we do is destroyed with us. So why do anything?
That is the question of this book. Right? And his answer is life is nonetheless a gift, and we should enjoy God's gift to us, because that's all there is. Right? I mean, it's a grim answer. It really is. He's a God-fearing person. He does see value in some of the things that we do. Cast your bread on the waters. Right? Don't think amassing great wealth will bring you happiness. Won't. Just bring you desire for more wealth. Right? So it's a down book. But I think his message is appreciate what you have. Right? Don't think beyond it. Yes, it is. None of it really lasts, but enjoy the gift of life. I think that for me, that's my takeaway. Sandy.
So about 1,000 years or so after Solomon, I think it's about that time, the concept of Olam Haba, the world to come, came into existence. I wonder if that was when Solomon was living, if that concept was there, if he would feel the same way. The idea that there's a future, that God will take care of us after we die, and it depends on what we do in a certain sense.
Yes, I think what's really interesting to me is the people who preserve this book believe that. Right? I mean, yes, what would Solomon think, or would the author of this treatise think? Would he have bought it? Unclear. But there is something deeply, profoundly true in this book. Even if you believe, that there's something after life. And I do. And yet I'm deeply touched by this book. Because I think it's honest. It's not pious. It's not, but there's a deep honesty to it. Go ahead, B.
But we have to realize that every generation adds something to our knowledge. We wouldn't be sitting in front of this Zoom
Yes.
if it hadn't been for generations and generations taking one step at a time, although now it seems to be running that fast. But all of this had to be before in order for us to be where we are now.
Yes. And I think that's the difference between the world that Kohelet. I don't want to say Solomon because it's not clear, although it does seem that the inscription has something. By the way, we know this book, whenever it was written, had to be completed. And so one of the reasons that people want to argue that it really wasn't Solomon is there are a few Persian words in the text, which would make it later than Solomon. We do know, though, that by the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls, 2nd century before the Common Era, this book was already included, was part of the biblical canon, because they found it among the Dead Sea Scrolls. At any rate, in Solomon's world, or in that ancient world, things didn't change. That was the world he lived in, right? The life of his great-great-great-grandfather was no different than his. The technology available, no different. Right? This idea that we live in a world scientific progress, right, didn't exist in antiquity. Right? And so, there is nothing new under the sun was true for him, not true for us. Sandy.
Well, maybe I read something, I don't know if it's true, that he was depressed. I mean, a depressed person sees the world differently.
Yes, there is certainly a sense of depression that runs through this. And he says that in some ways. He does. Whether he's clinically depressed, is another question. Is he just saddened by life? Or is he really depressed? I mean, he sets out to understand as a philosopher through experience what life has to offer. And he comes up with a somewhat positive message. There is value in enjoying life. And that's his message, right? There is value. It's just not lasting. Things will happen. Things will change. When you're glad today, you'll be mourning tomorrow. Right? But he still finds value in it. But yeah, it is a view that a depressed person could ascribe to. Is he depressed? Unclear. Other comments or questions? Okay, so next week will be our last class before we take a break, as we usually do for Shavuot. I intend, unless we're away, I want to pick up our class in September. I often wait till after the holidays, but the holidays don't even begin until October. And I don't really want, given the holidays and everything else, to wait till then. I'm still thinking about what I want to teach. Of two minds. One is to continue with Judges, which is the sequence to Joshua. And there's some nice stories there. Some of it's very, you have Samson, for example, you have Deborah, a number of other figures. On the other hand, I'm really drawn to Genesis. I've taught it a number of times, but there's always new stuff there. And I might just do that. I might just go back and teach Genesis again, because it's just inexhaustible. So I'll let you know. But that's where that's what I'm thinking now. In any event, next week, same time, be our last class. I hope to see you as we round up the year. All right. Have a good week, everybody.
You too.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.